Hey, so thank you so much for joining me here. Recently you tweeted, or maybe not so recently, but you tweeted about your use of the understanding map, and that just really kind of caught my attention. And I think the reason why it did was you were using this was your tweet here, an image from that. And the reason why this caught my attention was, this is a way that I had not seen teachers using the understanding map before. So I'd love for you to explain and talk a little bit more about kind of this assignment and how that's played out in your classroom, if you would.
Sure. So this was the junior class, 11th grade class, and I teach Spanish language and literature. So they were reading Chronicle of a Death Foretold by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and we were reading chapter by chapter. And so, since the moment that I learned about the understanding map, I thought that it was perfect for not only, like I think at the beginning, and maybe like some other people, I was hooked on the routines, and I'm going to like all the routines and these new routines, and routines are very shiny in that sense. And then like the next step for me was, and because this is, I teach at an IB school, so we have the inevitable exams at the end of the diploma program. So I was trying to find a way to connect the way they're going to be assessed in their final papers with what we are doing in class, but not only to inform my teaching by assessment, which is one of the IB directives, but also to foster understanding and develop the learning and the thinking of the students. And so I thought that the different thinking moves that are in the understanding map were the perfect door for students to come into that learning and to deepen that understanding as part of their formative process. And then I would see what happened in their final exams. So at this point, when I tweeted that we were like in the middle of the novel, and that was for chapter 3 of the novel, and I thought, okay, what are, from all the thinking moves that we have in the map, which ones are the ones that I think they need to develop the most, so they can, like, I know, what you said, that in order to say that there is true understanding, we need to be able to do all of these thinking moves or engage in all of these thinking moves. But I was like, let me think which of these are more important in this point. And so I chose those 4. And I like the way that the understanding map is with different colors, and I always have like everything color coded. So I gave students, like I organized them in 4 groups, and they had pieces of paper in the color that's represented in the map. And they are used to seeing the map in the classroom, and like we usually refer to the map. I'll come back to that later about how we do it like in regular lessons. And so I gave them this piece of paper, and I said, okay, so this group is going to focus on describing what they see. A different group was going to focus on, and now that we changed, now I don't have a classroom, now we're walking throughout the whole school. So now I have like papers of the nomad teachers. So now I have this. So exactly, so it was like light blue for students to describe what they saw in the chapter, the gold paper for reasoning with evidence, the orange for making connections, and the red for uncovering complexities. So the first part was for them to work with a partner or in groups of 3 all in the same thinking direction. So let's describe what's here. And it's very important for them to develop the ability of doing all these thinking moves with respect in language and literature, with respect to the content and the style. They, for some reason, have a strength in identifying content, but identifying style does not come that easy. So that was like a clear direction they have. And so I thought to start with that part of describing because, and this is also interesting, sometimes teachers are like, these are IB students, they are in 11th grade, they should not be describing, you know, that's like a first grade thing. But if you would be surprised at how they do when they write their essays, if they don't describe, like that's the first part of the thinking, and sometimes they just missed. And so, you know, we are used to doing see, think, wonder, and I always tell them you cannot jump to thinking. You have to first state what you see, and like we as teachers have to give them time to see and to describe what's there.
That's really the basis for analysis. Yeah. So you've got to have that really rich description. You have to identify things in order to move forward in that analysis.
Yes, and that also gives me as a teacher a place to start to, so I can identify what they're seeing or not seeing, you know, like what I was saying before about content and style. When I tell them, okay, use this piece of paper and describe what you see, you know, and I'm walking around and I can see, okay, like most of the comments that I see in this paper are about content. So I can like nudge them, okay, what do you see about the style? Like, how is this content represented in the chapter? So that to me is a very important part. And we do this even in 12th grade, you know, description is the first part, like what do they notice in what they're reading? And then we had another group, reasoning with evidence, which is key thinking move for language and literature. You cannot just say there is a tone of sadness. You have to give the evidence and you have to reason like why, you know, like what makes you say that, like how are you coming to this conclusion? And they have to support whatever they say. And then the orange group was making connections, which is also important to reveal like their individual understanding. And these are not only like connections that, like in one part, I asked them to make connections with what we have seen in the class, in the language and literature, like previous novels or movies, but I also want them to make connections to things that are maybe not related to a Spanish class. And those sometimes are the richest ones and are the ones that stay with them because they make like a personal connection, like, oh, I can see this in, you know, something that happened in a video game that I play, in a movie, in a, I don't know, piece of music that I played. So that was for the making connections. And then the last one was uncovering complexities and seeing, you know, like how different pieces come together to convey meaning. So the first part, they were working in groups and they were all working and trying to uncover like all these different pieces. Like a group was describing, a group was reasoning with evidence. And then after they have had some time doing that, I recombine them and have them in different groups. And so in each group, there was somebody with a blue piece of paper, yellow piece of paper, red piece of paper, you know, and it was like a big brain, you know, like, okay, let's combine like all the different thinking moves.
Right. And how did that, so in that conversation where you had, you know, one person from the describing what's there, one person from reasoning evidence, connections and complexity, say a little bit about how that conversation went. Was it just students sharing, or how were they moving forward with their understanding of the text at that point?
In the first part or the second part?
In the second part, when they were combined, yeah.
Well, in the second part, it was interesting to see that they were appreciative of what their peers were thinking and what they had discovered. I think that it's challenge sometimes to get them to have an academic discourse in the Spanish language and literature class, because like these students are able to communicate in Spanish perfectly, like day-to-day Spanish, but that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for them to have, you know, like a language literature register, academic register. And this allowed them to have that kind of interactions between themselves and for the interaction to feel like natural, because sometimes, you know, like we do like a stage and okay, let's do a Socratic seminar, and everyone, you know, like wears the hat of Socratic seminar. But this felt more like, okay, we are, I don't know, literary critics, and we are analyzing this novel, and this is what I see. And the best part, I think, of that interaction is that they required minimum input from me. You know, like the least amount of help they need from me, the best I think is going. So they were able to interact. I did not feel that I had to come in and say, okay, X, what do you think about what Y said? So I'm always thinking about like how to engage them in that kind of academic environment. And I think this was a good way of doing it.
And what kind of response did you get from students? Did they, how did they feel this facilitated their learning and their understanding of the text?
They are appreciative. They are happy about seeing. It's interesting because there's like a range of responses from them. So you can see from like somebody that said it was nice to see other students thinking, you know, because sometimes, and I think, you know, this is super important now that we are working online and, you know, everybody is in their own house, like working in silos and, you know, like very isolated. And I think they appreciate when they see each other's thinking. So that was, you know, one student. There were other students who, like the comments they made were about seeing the text from a different perspective that they had not seen before. There were other students who said that someone else had thought something similar to what this student had thought, but it was put in better words. So, you know, even if it's for that, they get the benefit of learning how to phrase something in a better way. There were students whose understanding shift because they have not seen the story from, you know, like a different character's perspective, and they were like realizing they had a very biased understanding of what they were reading, and they were like, okay, now I know there is this other way that like from which I can approach what I'm reading.
And, you know, having used the understanding map, you know, now for several years and things, what do you notice as a teacher? Are you seeing that students become kind of more comfortable with these moves? They become more automatic, or what is it that you're noticing?
Yeah, I noticed that students have a focus for the lesson. Like when we were in the building, I used to like write it on the board. And I think that was not only a benefit for the students, but also for myself, because sometimes you get like, oh, super excited, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And you're like redirection. Okay, this is where we need to go. So I think it helps them to, like, in many ways. One way to see where they're going, another way to see what's what's the expectation for them to be engaged in that lesson, or if it's, like an assignment. This is the kind of thinking that
you would
we're
literally
going to be.
write that kind of thinking on the whiteboard of saying, on today's lesson, we're going to be making connections or reasoning with evidence, or
Yeah, I write it in a like a cloud, like a thinking cloud. I think it's also and maybe this is another reason why the register or the discourse of the class has like increased a little, because now we have this vocabulary. It's like when I want to praise a student, and I have told them, like, if I ever say I like that, you have to stop me and you have to say, Senator Ortega, like, why do you like that? And so now I can say, and I have to think sometimes, because like, I have been using this, but still I have to think, and I can say, okay, let me think. And I take a minute and I say, okay, that was a good inference, for example, or that was a good connection. Connection, maybe it's easier, a good connection that you made with something else, or with something that you have studied in a different subject. But I think, well, being a language and literature teacher, having the words to name what we're doing, it's very important. And it's important for them, not only in developing their understanding and their thinking beyond the class, because, like the understanding map, like I have it here, like, you're going to do this like in your life, or they are already doing that. But also because this is the diploma program, so they are focused on their final exams. They can, even if they are only focused on assessments and final assessments at the end of the 2-year diploma program, they can see a correlation, because the criteria for, let's say, paper 2 asks about, does the student reason with evidence, not with those words, but different words. And so they see, there is meaning in doing this. This is useful. So I think, it depends on the student, but I think that even if it's the student, I think students enjoy having the challenge of being like intellectually connected and engaged with a piece of literature. But even those who are not can still see the point of, okay, I need to learn how to do this, because this is going to be assessed in the final exam.
And one last question for you, Ilsa. If you could, what advice would you give to, a teacher who's just been introduced to the understanding map? What things might you advise them? This would be helpful. This would be a good way to start. What advice could you give?
I think my advice would be what I have done and has worked, to have it really present. When you teach, when you plan, but sometimes it is clear when you plan, but then in real life it gets like a little lost. So I would, everything goes back to making thinking visible. I would make my thinking visible to the students. This is what we're asking of them, and we need to model for them. So this is what I'm trying to get. This is what I want you to understand. And this is the way we're going to do it. This is the method or the strategy, or, at the end of this unit, or at the end of this project, we are going to be able to, consider different viewpoints. So we are all going to learn how to do that in different ways. And I think that being vulnerable, so students know, that they may be learning Spanish language and literature, but I'm also learning how to teach, not because I'm a new teacher, but because I know this new strategy and this new methodology, and I have seen how the understanding map works and how the routines work. So I would be transparent with the students, and I would involve them in that, and I would ask for feedback, because sometimes everything else happens, but then like you do something and you don't ask for feedback. It's very important to hear, to listen what they say, because that's the only thing that's going to tell you, okay, this is worth it, I'm doing it, in a way that's meaningful, or we need to redirect.